Welcome to Shoot Like a Girl, a podcast featuring interviews with extraordinary military women from around the world who push their limits on and off duty. I'm your host, Kate Stewart, and this is episode number 10. Today's guest is Captain Stephanie Smith. Stephanie joined the Canadian Armed Forces as a nursing officer. She deployed twice to Afghanistan and also to the Philippines. Taking her career one step further, she decided to attend medical school to become a medical officer in the Canadian Forces. On top of all this, she also competed at the international level in triathlon.
Steady, steady, nice and steady. Right, heel, cover. I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
So you better get out of my way now.
So you better get out of my way now.
Before I roll all over you.
Before I roll all over you.
So let's get started. Welcome, Stephanie, to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, Kate.
Let's get started by talking about where you grew up.
Sure. I grew up in a small military town in Oromocto, New Brunswick. My dad was a infantry officer, and he met my mom actually there, who was initially in the band and then was a transport officer at one point. And that's where I spent most of my formative years, and also went to Petawawa, Ontario as well.
Did you know from a pretty early age that you also wanted to join the military?
I think that given both of my parents' background with the military, I always admired the military and thought it was interesting. I liked the structure and the organization. I liked the fitness component and all the competitions that you could be involved in. I didn't really think about it a lot until probably I entered university, and I was already in nursing school. I thought it would be nice to travel around the world and do some more adventure, get involved with the opportunities in fitness that I witnessed a lot of people at the base gym that I would meet, and they would talk about their cool experiences. So I was kind of intrigued about it then, and I had a lot of support from my parents early on to join, and they thought that it would probably appease my interest in doing third world nursing, as I called it, in my high school yearbook. And they just thought it fit my personality style well with the variety of opportunities you have. So I think getting their support made it easier to look into that as a profession.
Mm-hmm. I'm always curious whether or not people had military backgrounds, because for me, none of my family was in the military. So it was also new to me. So I always interested to hear about people who grew up in a military family and had those role models and, like the moving around to the different bases with the postings. Did you play a lot of sports growing up?
I did play a lot of sports. I think I played 7 sports in high school. My parents used to say you need to be more focused and not do everything, but really enjoyed being involved in both team sports and individual sports. I've always really enjoyed competition, but also really enjoyed the camaraderie that comes with being on a sports team. And I've also really enjoyed challenging myself to achieve new tasks or take on a new skill. I remember playing basketball in grade 12 for the first time because they needed more athletes to play. And given I played soccer and rugby and a lot of other sports, I got recruited to learn basketball pretty late in my high school career. But I think that I just really enjoyed the challenge of trying different things. And I was lucky to be at a Oromocto where you had that option of playing multiple sports at high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sort of the same way. I always like to try everything. I can't really imagine being one of those people who is just solely focused on one sport and that's all you do your entire life, because I just want to try everything and there's not enough hours in the day for it sometimes. So did you join the Reg Force initially, or was it the reserves?
So I initially joined the Reg Force as a nursing officer. I was in between my first and second years of nursing school, and did basically in between the summers and French training between nursing school, and then initially started working in Gagetown for my first job before being posted to Ottawa. And I worked there for 5 years, had the opportunity to deploy to Afghanistan from Ottawa a couple of times, then went to the Canadian Forces Health Services Training Center, which was an amazing job where I had the opportunity to teach med techs, nursing officers, physician assistants, and medical officers. And then I went to Petawawa at the field hospital, where I worked as the training officer, clinical training officer, and then was the OC of treatment company. Then I went on French language training for a year before getting the opportunity to go back to medical school and residency, where I've been in Calgary for the last 5 years.
That sounds like a super busy career. So I want to get more into some of those things, but I'm just going to walk it back a little bit. When you initially went through basic training, was it sort of a big culture shock for you?
It's a great question. My dad had me pretty terrified about basic training. He kind of had me thinking it was going to be like the movies and that it would be really intimidating. But I actually found the camaraderie that we got on basic training to be really positive and very similar to some of the sports teams that I've been on. And it reminded me in a way of those challenging training camps you went on where you're completing and you're trying to make the team. Mm-hmm. And I found that was really helpful. Like at the time I was playing rugby at university at UNB, the University of New Brunswick, and it had been pretty rigorous training that I had done throughout the year. Lots of physically demanding training, but also just the team aspect and working together, taking on challenges, and then also going through challenges of, going through losses, trying to adapt as a team. I found that really helped me with basic training. I think that the military at that time in 2001 was going through some transitions. And I do think that there was, I didn't find it to be as scary as what I was seeing, for example, in the movies, but I thought it was challenging in the sense that it was a variety of new things that I was taking on and learning. And I would say I was probably kind of a type A perfectionist, wanted to do well. And I found what I look back on in basic training was that you weren't always going to do well at everything. And it was very humbling experience to know that, you'd be given a task to take on, and it would often be almost, there would be no way you would be successful. And it was to teach you that sometimes you have to fail at tasks and figure out how to regroup and work with your team to learn how to kind of reevaluate the situation and take it on differently. But I think I really liked the variety of it all. Like you're running to fitness classes, and then you're going to drill, and then you're going to weapons training, and then you're doing small party tasks and taking on leadership skills. So I did like the variety of skills. And I think it was easier maybe because I was 18 at the time, and it was easy to listen to rules and regulation that people told me. But I think it maybe would have been harder if I had been older when I went through.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming there was no problem with the fitness for you. That wasn't probably overly challenging.
I actually don't like to say this, but I actually think I got less fit over basic training. But that's just because at the time, you're playing rugby at university, you're pretty fit at the time. But it was I actually lost weight on basic training because we were so active. You're up and down the stairs. So I think in general, maybe I had better ability to do longer activities versus like I probably lost my really acute fitness, like sprinting and stuff like that. But I think I just didn't have time to eat either. You're rushing from one thing to the next and get your meal quickly. But I think the fitness level that I was used to when I went there, and I actually was swimming at university that year. I forgot my first year of university, I did two sports at university. So I was probably the fittest I've ever been in my life. But I think I probably got stronger in the sense that I had never done a lot of, weights and like lifting a rucksack and stuff like that. So that was something unique to me that I hadn't done before. And I think I probably got mentally stronger than I had been. That's for sure.
So I did my BMQ in Borden because I was a reservist. And I know I've seen pictures of people at the Mega where they have got a little fitness facility, but I know when we were in Borden, I don't think we even touched a weight. It was all just running and calisthenics. And I don't even know if we had sandbags for that. So then that was when they had the express test at the time. So the people who failed their express test during BMQ, since it was just this summer BMQ, had to do remedial stuff in the evenings. But then it's like, well, it kind of wish that I could be doing that instead of sitting here sewing my name on my underwear, but that was how it worked then, I guess.
You actually reminded me of something. When I was about to start basic training the night before, we all got together and met each other and thought, well, let's go play soccer outside. And I was a soccer player and we were playing, and I crossed legs with another guy, and I swore I shattered my tibia, but I just had the hugest egg, and it was like on my the front of my leg, and I couldn't even get my boot done up all the way, so I had to have it like nice and loose at the top, and we had to do our express test that week, and they actually wouldn't let me do it because they said, like, your leg is so swollen, I could barely run. So they actually let me do the fitness test, I think 2 weeks after. I was really lucky, but I do remember the express test now that you bring it up, for sure.
Yeah, that's lucky that you didn't get recoursed. That would have, I guess, set you back quite a bit. So as far as a nursing officer, you mentioned that you deployed to Afghanistan, but prior to that, as a nursing officer in the Canadian Forces, do you work at civilian hospitals to get that clinical experience or any sort of trauma experience in real life before you go over?
Yeah. So initially, when I graduated, I worked as an immunization nurse in Gagetown, but I took a part-time job working in a medical and surgical floor to gain some clinical knowledge in the civilian environment before I was posted. And when I got to Ottawa at that time in 2005, there was a really good support for nursing officers to be working clinical full-time because we were getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. So I was really lucky that prior to my first deployment for 2 full years, I worked in a variety of areas. So I worked in surgical, orthopedic surgery, burns, and I worked then in trauma step-down units. And then I did my critical care course, which was to prepare to work in the emergency department and the ICU. So I did all of that, fortunately, before I deployed. So with that 2 years before my first deployment, I was very well supported by my unit to be clinical. And we would do a military, 1 time a week where we get together and do leadership training, teaching medical topics. I was very well supported to be embedded, if you will, in the civilian hospital. Mm-hmm. And then I deployed as actually a generalist officer initially, meaning I worked more in medical surgical patients and also some emergency when I was on that first deployment. Then I came back and worked full time in the intensive care unit. So I did adult intensive care mostly for about 1.5 years, and then some pediatric intensive care because I had seen on my first deployment how many children we treated, almost 1/3 of the patient population that we were treating. And so I got support from my chain of command to do that as well. And then deployed again in 2009 at that time as a critical care nursing officer working in the intensive care unit.
Is it role 3 that you guys have over there?
Correct.
And then, so when you're working there, you're treating civilians and coalition troops?
Correct. So we were treating the coalition forces. We were also treating the Afghan National Army, Afghan National Police. We were treating local civilians that were injured as well. And that's where we got that population of pediatrics. But interestingly, we would keep them longer as well because there weren't pediatric facilities that we could send these patients to. So we would often have pediatric patients that would just stay with us for a longer period of time to help support before they left the facility. But we did have definitely a variety of people. And within the coalition, we treated Canadian military, US military, British, many Australian, many other forces as well.
Did you guys do any sort of outreach clinics where you're out in the communities, or was it all where they come to you?
So we actually did have a program where nurses were coming from the Afghan National Army Hospital to train in our intensive care unit. So it was on my second deployment that they were coming and we were training them in our facility. And to me, this seemed bizarre to train people in a different environment that they work normally. So I actually developed a mentorship program for the Afghan National Army Hospital. And I would go a couple of times a week throughout that deployment to the hospital, which was not really far from the base. It was only about 15 minutes off the base, but I would go there and work with the interpreters to develop training aids that could help the nurses there to manage the critically injured patients. And they were either in the emergency department or the intensive care, and then also burns was the focus I was working on. And I would say that's probably the closest to outreach, other than we did have a clinic that once a week Afghan mothers and their children could come into the Afghan National Army Hospital, where we would do things like vaccinations and well women's checks. So that was another great opportunity to be a little bit more involved with the Afghan patient.
What was the most memorable part of the deployment for you? And then what was sort of the hardest aspects of it?
A really great question. I'd say the most emotionally overwhelming was the first time I lost a child in Afghanistan, because the father of this child had actually, both of them had been injured by an improvised explosive device. And the father was in the trauma bed next door. And I mean, he was being resuscitated just like she was. And I think it was just really overwhelming to have this 3-year-old little girl that didn't have anybody there to comfort her while she was not surviving related to these grave injuries that she had. And I just remember there was a couple of features. One, it was that emotional aspect of thinking, you know, this is so unfortunate for this child to be caught in the crossfire of the war. And I also thought it was just a very overwhelming for me at that time. That was on my first deployment, where I had not had a lot of pediatric experience, and nor did most of my colleagues. And it was overwhelming for all of us, because we didn't have a lot of the equipment that we needed to work with children, and we didn't have a lot of the experience we needed to make sure we could do the best that we could for that child. And I think even though we were lucky that the doctor we were working with had experience working with children, that the whole team really struggles when you don't have that experience working in that environment. And I think it's just hard to process when you lose a child. It just really compute, especially when you're in war, when you're thinking you're going to be dealing with, 18 and over soldiers. So I'd say that was probably one of the hardest times was having that. And then I'd say some of the most beautiful things was just the sheer love that the Afghan parents had for their children. Like, I had just never witnessed something so beautiful. Like, they would lie on the ground beside them in the intensive care unit and just be there to support them with anything they needed. And not only that, I found there was so much gratitude from the Afghan patients for the work we provided. And I think it's hard, like, coming from a first world nation where people are grateful, but sometimes it can be not communicated in the same way. And it can be challenging on healthcare providers to feel that gratification, and it can be very stressful. But I found in Afghanistan, people were just so grateful for the littlest things and absolutely so kind. I even had one of our patients that his son had a gunshot wounds to his arms, and he had been treated at an Afghan hospital. And unfortunately, his arm became extremely infected, and he was brought to us. He wasn't very responsive. And I remember the doctor having to tell him that he'd probably need to go to surgery to have his arm amputated. And I mean, the father was really pleading with him to save his arm. And the doctor was reiterating that, like, right now, we just want to save his life at this point, And then the father said, amputate my arm and give it to him. Like, just the most unbelievable things that people would do for their families. And that really transcended across working with the interpreters, that they were just wanting to do everything they could to really help all the healthcare providers be familiar with the culture and educate us on anything that we could do to help. And even learning the healthcare system in Afghanistan is such an important piece, because I can't just utilize the skills I use in a first world country where we have all the resources we can imagine. When you're in an environment where they have very limited resources, it's challenging to access those resources. And sometimes people don't even know where those resources are. So I think for me, like, the beauty and the sadness in many ways came from that experiences I saw with, working with the Afghan people, but also at the same time, feeling really sad for them getting kind of stuck in the middle of this unfortunate war.
One thing, I mean, I guess, obviously it's terrible when anyone gets injured, but for, a soldier who's sort of a willing participant, in the back of their mind, they know what they've signed up for. They recognize that there's a chance that this might happen, but just people who are sort of completely innocent bystanders, especially children, like, that would be Yeah, I can see how that would definitely be one of the hardest parts to deal with. And I mean, another thing that, and I'm not sure that a lot of people sort of outside of the military understand, is that if you're in a firefight and you wound someone and you don't kill them, you're now responsible for taking care of them. And that you could potentially have to treat a Taliban fighter if they're wounded worse than, say, a Canadian soldier. Well, then you've got to treat that Taliban soldier first, and you've got to put away whatever biases you have about them and treat them, which I think would be really difficult to do.
That is a great point. I mean, we would have times when we were treating in the same emergency trauma base patients that had been injured by, a Taliban soldier and then a Taliban soldier in another bed. And I mean, that was very challenging. And you're working in an environment where it's like a utilitarian approach, where you have to try to take the resources you have and get them to spread as far as you can. And so we don't have an infinite amount of resources. So you have to be very strategic with how you're using those resources, and it can be very emotionally overwhelming when you have to make those challenging decisions about which patient is going to go to the operating room when both need to, and you only have one operating room team available. And even as simple as having blood products available and who accesses those. And I think that actually highlights another really beautiful thing that I had never seen before, which was in Afghanistan, was the walking blood bank, which is just an absolutely beautiful to see, that siren go off over for people to come donate their blood. And then when you have a mass casualty incident and you need more blood products, people are coming there to donate their blood and save a life. Like, that moment is extremely impressive, that people are just so giving and kind, and they're already in an environment of stress themselves. And just that beauty of seeing how you can save a life and how much commitment soldiers had to supporting us. I felt that I've never worked in an environment where I felt that the team was so close and that everybody supported the facility and the staff so much.
Mm-hmm. And did you see any differences procedure-wise, or how you guys approached certain injuries in the first deployment versus the second?
I do think there was some differences, given that the first deployment we were at the Canadian-led facility. It was the same facility, but it was led by Canadians the first time and by the US the second time. And so there were different specialists that were available that I had not had the opportunity to work with on my first deployment. And so we did have access to potentially, neurosurgeons that we didn't the first time, or obstetricians, if, for example, if we had, or pediatricians that were there on deployment working with us. So there was a lot of expertise that came in with the US military staff that were working with us. So that was certainly different. And I also think it was interesting that a lot of the times, like from war, we learn how to adapt and develop the best practices in certain injuries that might not have been studied before. And so sometimes you're having people receive a surgery that's not been done before, but it's the best chance they have to salvage their limb. And I think it was just extremely impressive working with all of the surgeons and the physicians that were there, to often have to work outside of their comfort level or scope, because maybe in Canada they're dealing with more traumatic injuries that are coming from motor vehicle accidents, let's say, and then now you're in an environment where you're having improvised explosive devices and you're having blast injuries that not only are impacting bone injuries, but also blast injuries of the lung and head injuries that are significant. So you're seeing so many different injuries than you potentially would have in majority of places we lived and trained in Canada. But I think one thing I really loved is that when we did work with the multiple different nations, you always get the benefit of different experiences and training that can help the team at looking at things differently and being able to think outside the box. In a way, it's almost being like MacGyvering your way to get things done, because you're working often with less staff, with a smaller facility, with less equipment, and sometimes in a way not having the training in that specific area. But I think people really work together to find the strength in the team to get the job done.
I took a course a couple of semesters ago through RMC, and it was Technology, Society, and Warfare. So for my final paper, I chose the technology of medical training and TCCC. So reading some of the earlier articles about how that originated from the SOF community and the Army Rangers, and there would only be a certain number of people trained. And, even back in the day, they were like, oh, no tourniquets, to change into what it is now. And having, the more people trained on it, not just the medic, the better the chance of survival. So is it true, it was a really high percentage rate that if you could get the casualty to that Role 3 facility, that their chance of survival was actually very high if you could get them there alive?
Mhm. That is correct. It's been a long time since I've been to Afghanistan. It's been 12 years, but at that time, we certainly knew that if you could actually get to the Role 3 facility, your chances of survival, I think they were in the realm of like 99%.
Mm-hmm.
It was very good chances. And really, we owe that to the medics that were packaging up these injured casualties and soldiers, and that could get them there. It was unbelievable what they could do on the ground, in a dangerous environment, in a firefight. Like, I have so much respect for people that had to do that job and what that would have been like. And even being able to think medically is challenging, in the moment when I'm in a safe hospital and there's nothing else happening around me. Like, the idea of having to do that under fire, or when a patient is looking like near death. It's unbelievable. And they'd come in and they'd actually look pretty good. And then we'd unwrap them and we'd think, wow, how in the world, did they look that good when they brought them in? But we would, in a way, we call it like the golden hour.
Mm-hmm.
That hour often gets extended in war, but there were amazing innovations that were made by the med techs on the ground that recognized, like, this is how I'm going to MacGyver and get and use the tools that I have. And there was so much great literature that was coming out even early on in Afghanistan about the use of quick clot, the granulation rock that could help with cauterizing if there were any areas where you couldn't put a tourniquet, and also the application of tourniquets, training people to be able to do that independently. Then also the use of giving fluids to patients, and how you could balance trying to resuscitate patients with fluids, but also balancing that like permissive hypotension, where we would want to not give our patients too much fluid, because unfortunately, med techs can't carry around blood products with them in their backpack. So we had to try to have that balance. And I think it was such an amazing learning curve for all of us, but I think it probably was the most pressure on the med techs to really have to navigate, like, how much can I do in the field, but I just literally need to get them to the Role 3 hospital where they can have most of the time surgical intervention to be able to and or blood products to be able to resuscitate the patient. And I would say that you were correct, though, that once you got there, you did pretty well. So that was the goal.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that, really speaks to what you guys were able to do once they got to you, even with, it not being a hospital facility like you would see in North America with all of those resources available. So once you came back from Afghanistan, then what was your career path like?
So when I came back from my second deployment, I went to the Canadian Forces Health Services Training Center in Borden, and I initially was working with nursing officers running the basic nursing officer course and the clinical phase training program, which is similar to consolidated period of time for our nursing officers. After you would graduate, you'd be a fully functioning nurse, but we would do this training to get exposure in the variety of areas the military would need you to have competence to deploy, similarly to what I had done when I first graduated for those first couple of years. And did that for a couple of years. And then I went up to work in Banting Company. And then I went to not treatment company. I went to Topham Company in treating or teaching QL5 med techs. And that's like our advanced paramedic training.
Okay.
And that, I really loved teaching that. That was probably the most fun that I've had in the military. And just because I think for me, having the opportunity to work with the med techs on deployment and witnessing what their job is, day to day in a clinic versus like on a deployment in war, was just so diverse. Like, the expectation to be able to adapt in those environments is just, it's overwhelming, I would say, at the least. But I just really loved being involved in the training and helping, med techs be able to take on more skills themselves, but also to learn from them about how they manage and adapt in the environments that they've been in. So I found it a really good opportunity for me for learning. And I also really am passionate about teaching and making things as fun as they can be, and got really involved in simulation training at that time, and would run training for, well, that's how I had the opportunity to work with the physician assistants and medical officers. So I would work with their training exercises to bring on simulation training. So I did that as well with the nurses and the medical technicians, but I would get the opportunity to do a lot of collaborative training with the multitude of different professions working together, which is more realistic to practice. And I thought it was just really, it's fun, if anything, like you're having the opportunity to simulate real life disasters, whether it's man-made or whether it's a disaster like humanitarian disaster, but you have an opportunity to work with the team and do it in a safe environment where people can, we can make mistakes, we can learn together. And I think it was probably the most gratifying career opportunity I had, was working there.
I'm sure it made a difference for all the students too, like to have an instructor who's so enthusiastic about that. I know we've all probably been on some courses that you can tell that your instructor might not want to be there. So I'm sure they probably benefited a lot from having you instructing that. And I think it's so important as well to have that realistic training that induces that bit of stress, but at the same time, it's a controlled environment, but it helps you prepare for what you're going to see in the future or what you might encounter.
Definitely.
So throughout all this, at what point did you get involved in a triathlon, or was this something that was sort of happening throughout your career?
I started actually with running competitively. So as I mentioned, I was doing rugby at university, and I had done a local running race. And so one of the CISM, or I think it's the Council International Sports Militaire, the national team for this military, the coach had seen me locally in Gagetown or Ramocto and said, you should, come and train with us, and was fortunately able to. I had to make sure I break 20 minutes for my 5K. And so I went from 22 minutes and 30 seconds to 19 minutes and 30 seconds, working with him over 6 months. So in 2004, I started running with the CISM team. I had the opportunity to race in Tunisia, Africa, and Belgium as well, which was really fun. It was my first time really getting out of the country initially, when we went to training camps in Barbados and the Olympic Training Center in the States. So that was really exciting. And then I actually transitioned to triathlon team in 2008. And that was probably related to having the swimming background. I'd been swimming since I was a kid, and they were recruiting and looking for triathletes. So I transitioned then and had the chance to compete in Estonia. Then my first military World Games, which was in Brazil, which was amazing. And I had the best race of my life. I ended up finishing first for the Canadian team, and being really sick after. I swallowed way too much water and too much salt, and I felt pretty sick after, but it was the best race I've had. So that was nice. And then I've had the chance to race afterwards in Switzerland as well. So I've been very fortunate to have the opportunities to race with the military around the world, and go to many training camps in the United States and in Barbados, and just an amazing program. So many volunteers, the coaches and the trainers were always volunteering their time, and it's a lot of work. I mean, at one point I was probably training 20 to 22 hours a week for the 3 different disciplines. And at the time I was actually working at the training center, so pretty busy, but I've had a lot of support I found in my career. As long as I could get my work done, then they would be supportive for me to go race once a year. And I found it was really good to manage and balance stress. And I actually think it helped me on my deployments as well, although I didn't get to swim in Afghanistan, but I ran a ton when I was in Afghanistan. I ran, probably 40 to 50 kilometers a week in the heat. I would try to run at 5 or 6 in the morning before work, but I was teaching spin classes at the gym if I had some time off shift, or, leading core classes. But for me, fitness has always been a great way to relieve stress and a good outlet. So I think for me, that has been really helpful and really made me love the military. There's a variety of things you get in the military, but I think that opportunity to race around the world and meet other military members has been extremely fun.
And I know people who have done the various CISM meets and the places that they go in the world. It's really neat. I do have a friend, I think it was probably the same one in Brazil. She was a volleyball player. It would be so neat seeing everyone from all of the other countries. And I'm not sure how it works for a lot of them, but don't some of them have basically professional athletes that are just in a military uniform sort of for publicity or occasionally doing something, but for the most part, they're like a full-time athlete?
Correct. I was definitely schooled by many Olympians. Even in our race in Brazil, we were in the second pack, but the first pack was the Olympians. And we were only a couple of minutes behind coming out of the water. And then I say this often, it's like my claim to fame that they did their 40K in 59 minutes and my pack of 8 did ours an hour and a minute. So I was like, we're only 2 minutes behind the Olympians, but it's a big difference when you're in a pack. You're getting a lot of the work done by the rest of the team members, but then they destroy us on the run. I mean, some of them could run sub 35-minute 10K off a bike, just phenomenal athletes. And I do often joke that it would be neat to have competition where you could have like the 2 tiers, like the professional athlete Olympians that just put on a uniform once a year, and then the rest of us that do work in the military. But I'm not going to complain when I'm getting opportunities to race, for sure. And it's very humbling. It reminds you how much dedication and commitment goes into being a phenomenal athlete. And it's just been really amazing to have those opportunities. And I'd rather race an Olympian day and then kick my butt than not have the opportunity at all.
Mm-hmm. And it probably maybe even brings out some better times in you when you're pushing yourself, racing against someone that much better. What did your training look like for that? I mean, were you training like before and after work?
So when my training was probably the hardest, I had Sharon Donnelly, a previous Olympian that was actually in the Canadian military. And she was training me, and she was great because she would adapt my training if I needed it. But pretty much every day I was up at 5:30 to train. Minimally from 6 to 7, I would be swimming on most days, or either like leading a spin class to keep up the cycling in the winter. And if it was the summer, I'd probably do weights on those morning days. And then the evenings always gave me more time for like a big chunk of training. So I would normally do at least an hour and a half to 2 hours after work every day. And so those would normally be the runs and the bikes. And then the weekend always was a big chunk of time. So depending on where I was in my training cycle, going for a 3 or 4 hour bike ride would be the norm. Going for, a 2-hour run the next day would just be the expectation. And then also do long swim. We'd have more pool time on the weekend. So probably doing, a 2-hour swim on the weekend as well. And then during the summer, you're also racing a lot to manage, getting in the competitions before you do the big races with the military. But I also, did PT with my unit, and I count those as workout time as well. We would do circuits and stuff. And sometimes the unit would let me lead fitness training so I could adapt it to what I thought was really good for me too. And they knew that. But it's nice too when I taught courses, I would often say, I teach a spin class. Do we want to do that for PT or for physical training? And it was really nice, like camaraderie and bringing everybody together. I do not expect everybody to enjoy running like I do. So we often do group runs because then people, really wouldn't have liked me. But I found that it was definitely demanding at times with training. And there were times when I had to take it a little bit easier and do less. And I think back to that now, and I train very infrequently compared to that. I mean, I'm not training 2 or 3 times a day now. Now I'm, I do 1 workout a day, and I'm quite happy with that. And I do plan to get back into it more when I go back with the military, but going through medical training has been, very demanding hours. Sometimes they're 80 or 100 hours a week at the hospital on a busy rotation. So you don't have a ton of time to train. But I think I look back at it now and I wish I had been more appreciative of how fit I was, because you're always just trying to be faster and fitter, and not fatter. And I definitely found that I look back now and I think, my goodness, I could run 41 minutes for a 10K off the bike. Like I should have been happy with that, or I could run 18 minutes for a 5K, and I never appreciated the time. And so I often say to people, because I do a lot of coaching, or more so before medicine, but I've been coaching probably about 10 years. And I say to people, if there's one thing I can tell you is be grateful for where you're at and don't overtrain, because it's so easy to do too much and then just burn yourself and dig yourself into a hole. I actually kind of burnt out a bit with triathlon after racing for many years and decided to transition and decided to do the Petawawa Ironman, which is not triathlon Ironman, but kilometer rucksack march run, and then pick up the canoe and portage for 4K, and then 8K canoe, and then you put the rucksack back on and do 6K. So it's 50K. And as funny as it might sound that, I was burnt out from triathlon, so I did something different, but I think it was just mixing up the training, and I was used to training high volume. So my body could transition pretty easily to like that long distance event. And I found that was great. And I had tons of support from my unit at the field hospital, which was my last real job before I went like on French training and then the medical school. And I loved that unit. Like nothing could be more exciting than working with the unit that deploys to the disasters and the wars around the world. And they were so supportive. I remember the sergeant major brought the medics out to like cheer me on coming in. And I got really lucky the time I did that race, and I ended up finishing first for the women on that day. And I honestly believe it was like near that last 6K, I had so many people there cheering me on, and I wanted to quit. I had the worst blisters and it hurt everywhere. But it just speaks again to that camaraderie and that teamwork and that mental resilience that you get working in the military. So I think that kind of was the culmination of things before I went back to school.
And it's such a different, obviously it's still sort of cardio based, but it's so different running with nothing to then carrying, a canoe or a rucksack. And if, a lot of people have a hard time with that, if they're not worked up to it for sure. I find it so interesting how the Army has that and the Mountain Man, and the Navy we do a Navy run on the East and West Coast, and then we do the Navy bike ride, but there's nothing that's overly hardcore, which is kind of like, it would be fun to go compete in one of those Army competitions that's just like a grueling sufferfest.
That's a good word for it. I actually would love to have done Mountain Man, and I'm so close. Like Edmonton's only 3 hours away, and I've been here for 5 years, and I always thought I would do it in residency, and then COVID happened. So that's like shut down things. But during med school, it was just so busy. Like I just couldn't get the time to train, and I didn't want to go in and get injured. I think that, you can do lots of things, and if you're fine with just, competing, which I think is amazing. I just know myself, like I don't want to go in something unless I'm at the best peak I can be at, because I know I'm going to push myself to, complete failure, and I don't want to get injured. So, and I actually did have hip surgery after my second. I did Ironman another time, and I had about 2 weeks before that Ironman, I was racing, I was racing, but not like really racing in Ireland. I was on vacation. I signed up for a half marathon. I was using it as a training run. And my boyfriend and I at the time ran it. And it was essentially where there had been like war-torn grounds, and like all these really hardcore people had gone through like these boulders and stones, and we're running on this. And it was very hard on the body. And I remember afterwards being really sore. And I got back, and I couldn't really lift my leg up. I couldn't drive my knee up. And so I asked my physio friend to take a look, and she's like, "You've torn your labrum," which is essentially the cartilage in between my hip joint. And I was like, well, yeah, but like, that's fine, right? I'm still going to race Ironman. And I was so ready to destroy my record. That was my plan. And it was probably the most humbling thing I've done, because I was 2 days out, and I went to see the physio. And like I said, she had told me this injury. I was just mentally so prepared to do this race. And then the morning of, I woke up, and I just knew my body would not be able to keep it together for this race, but I didn't want to pull out. And I actually started racing. I'm 10K into it, and all the people I've been training with that year are passing me. And I'm like, we've done a quarter, a half, a 3/4 Ironman. And I'm like, this is not good. Like everybody's starting to pass me. I can't run. I just like can't drive that knee up. I already had blisters. I had to actually fix my blisters at 10K in. And I thought, I just want to quit. I'm not going to win this race. It's not worth it. You're saying all these things in your head. And essentially, I had a friend go by that just said, you got this, Stephanie, and just like that positive thought. And I thought to myself, Sharon Donnelly, my previous coach for triathlon, said to me, there's one thing she regretted in all of her racing around the world and, Olympic trials and in the Olympics and many races. And she said, I one time pulled out of a race and I quit. And I still regret making that decision. She's like, whether you finish and you're having your best day or you're having your worst day, just finish the race. So I said, I made the decision right then. I'm not going to quit. I'm just going to keep going. And it ended up being very tumultuous weather. I was the last person to get on the water before they canceled people going on the water. So those people had to actually do a rucksack longer. They had to do 8K instead of the canoe. And then a 6K, I would have been devastated. My feet needed the break. And the water was so bad that I couldn't get in. I was stuck. I was like going past the entry point. And so I ended up going about 2 kilometers past and then going backwards around the island and getting into the entrance, which was great. I mean, I was ready in my mind that wherever I ended up, I'm picking up that canoe and I'm carrying it back. I'm not finishing this race at this point. And I get out. And so at this, I've done the 32 kilometers of the rucksack, done the 4K portage, done now 10K of the canoe. And I get in and there's 2 of my friends there, one that works with me and one that goes to kind of CrossFit type classes with me. And they're like, you got this, Stephanie, like just stay tough. And, it's what you need to hear in those moments. And ended up finishing the race. I mean, was really still lucky. Like I finished 4th female overall and my team won. So we had the other girl that won was actually a girl I trained with all summer. And so we had, the top 2 women and top 2 men combined to get this team award, which was so exciting for the field hospital. And I thought the lesson learned there is that you're not always going to have the best race of your life. There's going to be days where it's really hard and you've just got to suffer through it. And, just finishing is sometimes the best thing you can do and your team can still be just as successful. So I think I was pretty lucky that I had this positive mindset that day, because I'm telling you, I really wanted to quit.
Yeah, I was expecting you to say that you came in last or something and you're like, oh, I came in 4th. But yeah, I mean, I think that is such a big thing too. You see people becoming popular online now with the David Goggins and the Cameron Haynes and all those people who do these crazy ultra marathons, and the mental toughness is sort of getting out there a bit more now. There is something to be said about just putting your head down and just grinding it out. And I think obviously like people in the military are a little more used to doing that than the general population.
Yeah.
Then sort of transitioning back to your career, how did you decide that you wanted to become a doctor?
So I actually wanted to be a doctor all of my life. I used to watch Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, on TV with my mom. And my mom's a nurse and my oma's a nurse, my aunt's a nurse. Like it seemed like the right fit initially to go into nursing, because my mom said, well, at least then you're getting clinical experience. See if it's what you want to do. You have an undergraduate degree that you can use, and not just, if I went in sciences and I, didn't find the right calling for me, then it might not be the best fit. So I was really glad that I did that. And I really wanted to do medicine right away, but I owed time back to the military. And then I was just having so much fun as a nurse. And I was having such a great time with all the deployments and all the teaching opportunities and the simulation training I was doing. Once I got to the field hospital, we were doing international exercises, with the UK. It was just so fun. And I had the opportunity to deploy with the disaster assistance response team to the Philippines after the typhoon in 2013. And I had so much opportunity as a nurse there and I loved it. But I remember working with the physicians and thinking, oh, I just really want to do this. I really want to do this independent practice where I can work in an environment where maybe it's just me. And I just wanted to learn a lot more. And I was really in awe of the physicians that I was working with on that domain. And, I thought back to the many physicians I had worked with in Afghanistan, many of which have been very supportive of me pursuing medicine and going back. And I think it takes a long time to really, truly develop that confidence that, especially when you're in the healthcare environment and you see how much you need to know as a physician. And I thought, I wonder if I'm smart enough. I would often say to myself, and I knew I was hardworking enough, but I wondered if I could retain that much knowledge in my brain. And I've since learned, going into medicine, there are those people that can just retain everything they learn. And one thing I've noticed I'm really good at is I'm really good at remembering who I can call when I don't know. So I've developed, good connections with people that have the expertise in an area that I might not have. And I just think medicine there's so much knowledge we're expected to know, and it grows and it grows. And I think it's humbling to remember that you can't possibly know everything, but if you have a really good team of people or know who you can reach out to, or if you're willing to say to patients sometimes, like, I'm not exactly sure, I need to research this a bit more and get back to you. But I think I saw early on that the independence of, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, was really appealing to me. And I really love the team aspect of medicine and nursing and healthcare in general. But I do like taking on that leadership role. I like being the team leader. I like challenging myself to be the one that has to make those tough decisions. And I think I just also really love the scope of skills and whatnot that you can do in medicine. So I think there's days I really do miss nursing. And often people I work with say, Stephanie, you aren't the nurse and the doctor now. Like, I try to do both things. But I loved the relationships I really built with my patients as a nursing officer. And it's beautiful. You're the one you're the eyes and the ears really of the doctors. You're with them 24/7, the patients. And I really love that. And it's something I'm trying to foster in medicine, where I still can maintain those beautiful relationships, but also balance that and use my team effectively, so that the nursing staff are obviously getting to do their job and I'm doing mine. But I think I definitely don't have any regrets about going back. And I think it probably going back a bit older was good, because I have the knowledge and skills from nursing that really helped me have the confidence I needed to get the job done in medicine, I guess.
How much schooling is it from that point where you had your nursing degree then to become a doctor?
So I had to do a 3-year program, or I had the opportunity to do a 3-year program at the University of Calgary. There's 2 schools in Canada that do that, McMaster as well. And it just is that we don't take any break at all. So there's no summer break, and you start a bit earlier in the summer, the first year. And then after that's done, you have to do a 2-year residency in family medicine if you're in the military. So if you're outside the military, you can do any surgery rotations or, emergency obstetrics, all of that. But in the military, we do family medicine, and then you do that and you work for, at least a few years before you could decide you want to apply for other specialties. If you wanted to do, let's say, orthopedic or general surgery, radiology, psychiatry, internal medicine, physiatry, anesthesiology. And but there's also the options of going back and doing like an extra year of emergency, which I'm really interested in. And we'll see if it happens, but I think that it makes sense for the military to train doctors to be family doctors. We need family doctors. And then gain that experience. And if you want to go back and do another specialty on top of it, you can do that later on.
Mm-hmm. I'd be so interested in diving medicine. I mean, not that I would be able to go to school for that long to become a doctor.
Definitely. Yeah. Like you can do on top, like do master's programs for dive medicine, for air medicine, and you can do infectious disease, like there public health. There's so many amazing opportunities that are available to just expand your knowledge. I think that was the balance, though, getting stretched so thin and having to have expertise in a variety of areas.
So what advice would you give women wanting to join the Canadian Forces, and specifically those interested in the medical field?
So firstly, I would say when you go to the recruiting center, you can be going to find information about different professions, occupations, but make sure you're not pushed into doing something that you don't want to do. If it's not something you're sure you're passionate about, then I would say probably just stick with your guns and go with what you want to do. And when it comes to the medical field, I think the opportunities are unbelievable in the military. So I would say that whether you want to come just for 4 or 5 years, or you want to make a career of it, you don't have to make that decision initially, but you will get amazing experiences. You will have opportunities to get unique training, unique experiences, probably get some deployments, and you'll develop unique skills that you probably wouldn't have otherwise, even just going through basic training. So I think that if you're intimidated about joining the military because you think it's going to be too physically challenging, or you're concerned about, having to move around a lot, I think those are fair concerns that people might have. But I would recommend, talking to someone about the reality of what things are, because it's not like the movies make it seem to be. But I think it's more realistic to think that the military has adapted over time, and we really want to recruit and get more females. I know the Prime Minister has said that before, and we want more female representation in the military. And I do think the opportunities are just so amazing. And you can take those experiences with you when you go off to other careers in the future, if you decide to do it for a shorter period of time. But I have no complaints. I mean, having a nursing degree, a master's degree, and a medical degree paid for by the Canadian Armed Forces, and have had numerous courses I've been trained to be able to be an instructor on. I just think that is such a gift that we have, and it's a unique opportunity. So I say that if you think you're interested, do a little bit of background work to explore what the reality of it is. Talk to someone that's in the military, reach out to the recruiting centers. They can connect you with people. And I think, take on the challenge. It's probably worth it. It's a really amazing career.
Awesome. That's excellent advice. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
No problem. I feel lucky that I've been gone for a few years, back in school, and I'm excited to put the uniform back on in a couple of weeks when I go to my first job working as a new doc in Ormocto, back to where I started. So I'm pretty excited about that, and feeling really fortunate about being done school, and actually had graduation last week.
Wow, that's amazing. Congratulations. And thanks again for being on the podcast. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to help support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review on your Apple Podcast app.